Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church. And I'm here today to start a new week with you. And this week, I want to talk about some of the miracles that we read in Mark 4, 5, and 6. Now, I just picked these out at random. I don't know that they necessarily represent all of Jesus's miracles. Don't even know if they're just specific here because I didn't look that up. But I just thought it'd be interesting to look at them and see if they say something to us today. So I want to start out with, what is a miracle? Well, probably lots of definitions out there. The one I'll use is that it is something that happens that you can't explain by some rational, reasonable, scientific answer. Okay? Keep that in mind. I'll come back to it. Mark chapter 4, beginning with verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples walking up shouted, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. And then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Well, we'll set the stage. Jesus has just finished preaching a large sermon, decides to go across to the other side of the sea, the pond, the lake, the body of water, whatever you want to call it. So he gets in the boat, takes a nap. Jesus knows how to rest. Sometimes we're not so sure about that. But he takes a nap, and while he's taking the nap, suddenly a great storm comes up, and the disciples are afraid. Now, this is interesting because several of the disciples are fishermen who have fished on this same body of water many, many, many times. They know the water. Now, that doesn't mean that they can control it, but they know this isn't unusual, and it probably isn't the first time they've been in this predicament. You can't fish on that body of water all those years and not encounter some horrible storm at some point. So some of them are in really familiar territory. But the disciples wake up Jesus. Remember, he's still asleep. How you can be asleep in that environment, I don't know. I've been on some boats in some rough waves. Nothing like this, of course, but when that thing gets to rocking and up and down, it's a little hard to sleep. At least it is for me, but Jesus sound asleep. And they wake him up and say, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" Well, let's start with that question. Do you really think Jesus didn't care? I don't. I think he cared about all people at all times, including this one. But the disciples are so scared. All they can think of is some dumb question. Don't you care that we're about to drown? So he speaks to the wind and to the waves, and they slow down, they disappear. And then he turns to the disciples and he speaks to them. Now, see if you can set this picture in your mind. You got Jesus giving a speech, giving a sermon, getting in the boat with the disciples, heading off onto the other side. Big storm comes up. They're going to die, they think. Wake him up. He stops all of it. And then he looks at them and he says, "Why are you so afraid? After all that has happened, do you still have no faith?" What do you think is harder, stopping the storm or getting the disciples to quit being afraid? Well, you might think it would be stopping the storm, but evidently that's pretty easy for Jesus. Now, I'm not saying it'd be easy for you and me. I have had some instances that were somewhat vaguely, remotely similar, but that's another story. What would be easier, calming the storm or getting the disciples to quit being afraid? Well, obviously, the simpler thing was still in the storm. But that impressed them because they said after this, even the winds listen to this man. Who is he? Well, they missed his question. You see, sometimes we get so busy in the situation we find ourselves in, we miss what God's trying to teach us or trying to say to us. Now, it's not that we're terrible people or that we're disobedient and we don't want to follow God. Most of us do that I'm talking with. Some of you don't, and it's understandable from all that's happened, but maybe you'll try sometime in the future. What is so hard in trusting? Well, it's because you and I live in the moment of right here. And in the moment of right here, when things happen, it's hard to believe that God is still in charge. Sometimes he has to send us a miracle so we'll notice he's even there. And then many times he sends us a miracle and we miss it. Why? Because we think everything has to make sense. And you know what? In life, some things just don't make sense. So I'm going to invite you this week to come along, listen, think about your life. If you were there at this moment back then, would you try to answer Jesus' question? Why are you unafraid? Or why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Or would you just hung your head and change the subject like the disciples did? Well, you think about it. If you have a need or a concern, give us a call. I appreciate sharing with me your time. And if there's anything that we can do to help you out, if we can do it, we'll try it as fast as we find out. So give us a call. Thanks for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with another miracle.